It was early Sunday morning in Pine Ridge, a small and quiet town in Alabama. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The air smelled fresh, and the streets were calm except for the occasional chirping of birds or the distant hum of a car passing by. In one corner of the town stood an old wooden house surrounded by tall oak trees. Behind it was a modest garage where Henry Davis spent most of his days. Henry was an elderly black man with deep wrinkles on his face that told stories of many years gone by. His hands were rough and calloused from decades of hard work, but they moved with precision and care as he tinkered with tools and spare parts scattered around the garage. Above the entrance hung a faded sign that read, "Auto Repair," its paint peeling from age. Despite its worn appearance, the sign carried a sense of pride. It represented not just a job, but a lifetime of dedication. For as long as anyone could. Remember, Henry had been the go-to mechanic in Pine Ridge. People trusted him to fix their cars no matter how complicated the problem seemed. He didn't have fancy equipment or a shiny showroom like the big repair shops in the city, but what he lacked in modern amenities, he made up for with skill and experience. Over the years, he'd earned a reputation for being able to fix anything, from rusted-out trucks to sputtering sedans. Yet lately things had changed. Younger folks seemed less interested in his services, preferring to take their vehicles to chain stores with flashy advertisements and promises of quick fixes. Still, Henry kept working, content in his little corner of the world. On this particular morning, Henry was busy organizing his tools when he heard the crunch of gravel under tires coming up his driveway. He straightened up slowly, wiping his oily hands on a rag as he turned toward the sound. A sleek silver BMW pulled into view, its shiny surface gleaming in the sunlight. It came to a stop right outside the garage, and two people stepped out, a young white couple who looked completely out of place in Henry's humble surroundings. The man, Jake Harper, was tall and lanky with short blonde hair and a confident stride. He wore expensive jeans and a designer t-shirt, clearly trying to project an image of success. His wife, Lily, followed close behind, her blonde curls bouncing as she walked. She carried herself more softly than her husband, her floral sundress and sandals giving her a gentler appearance. Together they approached Henry with hesitant steps, glancing around at the cluttered garage with obvious disdain. "Hi," Jake said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "Our car broke down just down the road and we saw your sign. Do you think you can help us?" Henry nodded politely, offering them a warm smile. "Sure thing," he replied in a slow, steady voice. "What seems to be the trouble?" Jake frowned slightly, looking uncomfortable. "Well, I'm not really sure. It just kind of died on us. Honestly, I doubt you'll be able to figure it out. This is a pretty high-end vehicle." Lily shifted uneasily beside him, shooting him a glance that suggested she didn't agree with his tone, but Jake continued anyway, his words dripping with condescension. "I mean, these German-engineered cars are way beyond most mechanics, so—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Henry didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the couple carefully, noting the subtle sneer on Jake's lips and the faint blush creeping onto Lily's cheeks. He'd encountered attitudes like this before, people assuming that because of his age or the color of his skin, he couldn't possibly understand something as advanced as modern technology. It wasn't the first time, and it likely wouldn't be the last, but Henry had learned long ago not to let such comments bother him. "Well," he said finally, his voice calm and measured, "why don't you let me take a look? No harm in checking, right?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then shrugged dismissively. "Fine, whatever. Just don't waste too much of our time if you can't fix it." Henry ignored the jab and gestured for them to follow him to the car. As he leaned over the hood to examine the engine, Jake and Lily exchanged a look. Jake rolled his eyes exaggeratedly, mouthing the word amateur, without realizing Henry could see him. Lily bit her lip, clearly torn between loyalty to her husband and discomfort at his rudeness. Meanwhile, Henry worked quietly, his movements deliberate and efficient. Decades of practice allowed him to diagnose problems quickly, even without the use of high-tech diagnostic machines. He popped open the hood and began inspecting the engine, his sharp eyes scanning for any signs of damage or malfunction. Despite Jake's earlier skepticism, Henry knew exactly what he was doing. "You know," Jake said loudly after a few minutes, "this whole setup looks pretty outdated. Are you sure you even have the right tools for something like this?" Henry paused, briefly, glancing up at him with a hint of amusement in his eyes. "These tools may not look fancy," he said evenly, "but they've served me well for 40 years. Sometimes it's not about having the newest gadgets, it's about knowing how to use what you've got." Jake snorted, clearly unimpressed. "Yeah, okay, we'll see how far that gets you." Lily elbowed him gently, whispering, "Jake, stop, you're being rude." Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but Jake waved her off with a careless shrug. "It's fine," he muttered. "He probably doesn't even hear us." But Henry did hear them, every word, and while their insults stung, he chose not to react. Instead, he focused on the task at hand, determined to prove them wrong. Not for their sake, but for his own satisfaction. After all, he'd faced worse challenges in his life, and he wasn't about to let two strangers shake his confidence. As he worked, a memory surfaced in his mind, a memory of a time when he was younger, full of ambition and dreams. Back then, he'd dreamed of opening his own auto shop, complete with state-of-the-art equipment and a team of skilled workers. Life hadn't turned out quite the way he'd planned, but he'd built a good life for himself nonetheless. And though his garage might not be glamorous, it was his. That thought alone gave him strength. After several minutes of inspection, Henry straightened up and turned to face the couple. "I think I see the issue," he said calmly. "Give me a little more time and I'll confirm it." Jake raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You sure about that? Because if you mess it up, we're taking it somewhere else." Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't worry," he assured them. "If I can't fix it, I won't charge you a dime." With that, he returned to his work, leaving Jake and Lily standing awkwardly beside the car. For the next hour, the only sounds were the clinking of tools and the occasional sigh from Jake, who grew increasingly impatient as time went on. Little did he know, Henry was closer to solving the problem than he realized, and the surprising twist was yet to come. While Henry worked, Lily glanced around the garage, noticing the countless tools neatly arranged on shelves and the piles of spare parts stacked in corners. There was a sense of order in the chaos, and she found herself admiring the craftsmanship of it all. She wondered how many cars Henry had fixed over the years, and how many lives he'd touched with his work. Despite her husband's attitude, she couldn't help but feel a growing respect for the older man. Jake, on the other hand, remained restless. He paced back and forth, checking his phone every few minutes and muttering under his breath. At one point, he said loudly, "This is ridiculous. We should have called a tow truck instead of wasting our time here." Lily shot him a sharp look. "Jake, give him a chance. He's obviously experienced." Jake scoffed. "Experienced? Look at this place. It's falling apart. How can someone like him possibly understand modern cars?" Lily opened her mouth to reply but stopped herself. She knew arguing with Jake would only make things worse, so she stayed silent, choosing instead to watch Henry work. As she observed him, she noticed the calm focus in his eyes and the steady rhythm of his hands. There was something reassuring about the way he moved, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Finally, after nearly an hour of tinkering, Henry stepped back from the car and wiped his hands on his rag. "All right," he said, turning to the couple. "I found the problem. It's a faulty sensor in the engine control unit. It's causing the car to shut down unexpectedly." Jake stared at him, disbelief written all over his face. "A faulty sensor? Are you serious? How do you even know that?" Henry didn't take offense. Instead, he pointed to a small device connected to the car's diagnostic port. "This is how I know," he said simply. "It's showing an error code that matches the symptoms you described." Jake crossed his arms, still skeptical. "And what makes you think you can fix it? Do you even have the part?" Henry smiled faintly. "I do. Give me a little more time and I'll have your car running like new." Jake wanted to argue further, but Lily interrupted. "Let him finish, Jake, please. He knows what he's doing." Reluctantly, Jake agreed. though he continued to grumble under his breath. As Henry returned to his work, Lily watched him with newfound admiration. She realized that there was more to this old man than met the eye, and she couldn't wait to see what happened next. Henry worked steadily, his movements calm and deliberate. The garage was quiet except for the occasional clink of metal tools or the soft hum of the car's engine as he tested different components. Jake Harper stood nearby, arms crossed, tapping, his foot impatiently. Lily hovered closer to the car, her eyes following Henry's every move. She seemed curious, maybe even a little fascinated, but she kept her distance, unsure how to bridge the gap between her husband's rudeness and her growing respect for the older man. Jake, on the other hand, couldn't resist making snide comments. "You know," he said loudly after a few minutes, "this is taking way longer than it should. Any decent mechanic would have fixed it by now." Henry didn't look up. He was focused on examining a small sensor he'd removed from the car's engine control unit. His fingers moved carefully, checking for damage or signs of wear. Without missing a beat, he replied in his slow, steady voice, "Every problem has its own pace, son. Rushing won't make it go faster." Jake rolled his eyes dramatically. "Yeah, sure. But this isn't exactly rocket science, is it?" Lily shot him another warning glance, but Jake ignored her. Instead, he leaned against the BMW, pulling out his phone and scrolling through social media as if to emphasize how bored he was. Occasionally, he muttered under his breath, saying things like, "This is such a waste of time," or, "I can't believe we're stuck here." Lily sighed quietly, glancing at Henry again. She noticed how patient he was despite Jake's constant jabs. There was something admirable about the way he stayed focused, refusing to let anyone rattle him. It made her wonder what kind of life he'd lived before this moment. How many people had doubted him only to be proven wrong later. While Henry worked, Jake continued to insult him indirectly, assuming Henry wasn't paying attention. At one point, Jake turned to Lily and whispered, though not softly enough, "Seriously, this guy probably still fixes horse-drawn buggies or something." Henry heard the comment but didn't react. He simply tightened a bolt with his wrench and set it aside. If anything, the remark seemed to fuel his determination. He knew better than to engage with someone like Jake, someone who judged others based on appearances rather than actions. Instead, he channeled his energy into solving the problem, knowing that results spoke louder than words. As the minutes ticked by, Lily grew more uncomfortable. She could feel the tension building between Jake and Henry, even though Henry didn't seem bothered by it. Finally, unable to stay silent any longer, she stepped forward and said gently, "Jake, maybe you should give him some space. He's clearly working hard." Jake scoffed. "Oh, come on, Lily, you're not falling for this act, are you? Look around, this place is a dump. He's just stalling because he doesn't actually know what he's doing." Before Lily could respond, Henry spoke up. His tone was calm but firm. "If you don't trust me, that's fine. I'll finish what I'm doing and then you can decide whether to pay me or take your car somewhere else." He paused, looking directly at Jake for the first time since they'd arrived. "But I promise you, I don't need your approval to do my job." The words hung in the air, silencing Jake momentarily. For a split second, Lily thought her husband might apologize, or at least tone down his attitude. But instead, he smirked and said, "We'll see about that." Despite Jake's skepticism, Henry pressed on. He reached into a dusty toolbox and pulled out an old laptop connected to a tangle of wires and adapters. The device looked ancient compared to the sleek gadgets most people used these days, but it was clear that Henry had customized it over the years. With practiced ease, he plugged it into the car's diagnostic port and began typing commands. Lily watched intently as numbers and codes scrolled across the screen. She didn't understand most of it, but she could tell that Henry knew exactly what he was looking for. After a few moments, he pointed to the laptop and said, "See this? This confirms what I told you earlier. The sensor is faulty and it's causing the entire system to shut down. Replacing it will fix the issue." Jake squinted at the screen, clearly skeptical. "How do I know you're not just making that up? Anyone could fake those numbers." Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Go ahead and call a tow truck then. Take it to another shop if you want. But when they tell you the same thing, don't come crying back here." For the first time, Jake hesitated. There was something about Henry's confidence that made him doubt himself, even if only for a moment. Still, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. "Fine," he said, grudging slightly. "Fix it. But if you mess it up, you're paying for the damages." Henry nodded, unfazed by the threat. Fair enough, as Henry searched for a replacement sensor among his collection of spare parts. Lily decided to strike up a conversation. She walked over to where he was kneeling and asked cautiously, "How long have you been fixing cars?" Henry glanced up, surprised but pleased by her interest. "Oh, a long time," he replied with a faint smile. "Started when I was about your age, maybe younger. Back then, cars were simpler. No computers or fancy gadgets, just good old-fashioned engines." "That must have been nice," Lily said, trying to imagine a world without smartphones and touchscreens. "Did you always want to be a mechanic?" Henry chuckled. "Not really. I wanted to be an engineer once, design machines instead of fixing them. But life doesn't always turn out the way you plan, does it?" Lily nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. "Still, it sounds like you've done pretty well for yourself." "I've been lucky," Henry admitted. "Found something I enjoy and stuck with it. That's all anyone can ask for, I suppose." Their conversation was interrupted by Jake, who had grown restless again. "Are you two done chatting? Some of us actually have places to be." Lily flushed with embarrassment, but Henry remained unfazed. "Almost there," he said evenly, holding up the replacement sensor. "Just give me a few more minutes." True to his word, Henry finished installing the new part quickly. He double-checked all the connections, making sure everything was secure, before closing the hood. Then he gestured for Jake to try starting the car. With a mix of reluctance and curiosity, Jake climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. To everyone's relief, including Jake's, the engine roared to life immediately. The dashboard lit up, displaying no warning lights or error messages. For a moment, Jake looked genuinely impressed, though he tried to hide it. "Well," he said gruffly, stepping out of the car, "I guess it works. How much do we owe you?" Henry named a price that was surprisingly reasonable given the complexity of the repair. Jake frowned, muttering something about being overcharged, but Lily intervened. "That's fair," she said firmly, handing Henry a wad of cash. "Thank you so much for your help." Henry accepted the money with a polite nod. "You're welcome. Drive safe now." As Jake and Lily prepared to leave, Lily lingered for a moment. She hesitated, then said softly, "I'm sorry about earlier. My husband doesn't mean to be rude, he's just—" "It's all right," Henry interrupted kindly. "I've dealt with worse. No harm done." Lily smiled gratefully, then hurried to join Jake in the car. As they drove off, Henry watched them disappear down the driveway, shaking his head slightly. He knew people like Jake existed, people who judged others without knowing them. But he also knew their opinions didn't define him. With the Harpers gone, Henry returned to his workbench, tidying up the tools he'd used. As he did, a neighbor named Mrs. Peterson approached the garage, leaning on her cane. "What was all that about?" she asked curiously. "Oh, nothing special," Henry replied with a shrug. "Just a couple of folks needing help with their car. Nothing out of the ordinary." Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "Didn't sound like nothing. That man was awful rude." Henry chuckled. "Some people are like that. Best not to let it bother you." Mrs. Peterson shook her head disapprovingly. "Still, it's a shame. Folks these days don't appreciate what they've got." Henry didn't argue. He knew she was right, but he also knew that gratitude wasn't something you could force. Sometimes people needed to learn lessons the hard way, and judging by the look on Jake's face when the car started, Henry suspected he might have learned one today. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, Henry sat down on a stool in the corner of the garage. He picked up a worn notebook filled with sketches and notes, flipping through the pages thoughtfully. Over the years, he'd dreamed up countless inventions and improvements, though few had ever seen the light of day. Fixing cars paid the bills, but designing new technology was his true passion. He paused on a page detailing a concept for an advanced engine modification, one that could significantly improve fuel efficiency and reduce emissions. It was an idea he'd been tinkering with for years, inspired by his brief stint as a consultant for NASA decades ago. Though he'd never pursued it commercially, he often wondered what might happen if he shared it with the world. For now, though, he kept his dreams to himself, content to live quietly in Pine Ridge. The town might be small and his garage might be modest, but Henry knew he had everything he needed. And as he closed the notebook and gazed out at the sunset, he felt a deep sense of peace, a reminder that sometimes the greatest achievements were the ones no one else saw. After the Harpers drove off, Henry stood quietly for a moment, watching the dust settle on the driveway where their BMW had been parked. He felt a mix of emotions: pride in a job well done, frustration at Jake's arrogance, and a strange sense of curiosity about how the young couple would react once they realized just how skilled he truly was. But those thoughts didn't linger long. Henry had lived too many years to let others' opinions weigh heavily on his mind. Instead, he turned back to his garage, ready to clean up and move on with his day. Mrs. Peterson, who still lingered nearby, stepped closer to him. "You handled that real well," she said, her voice warm but firm. "That man didn't deserve your patience." Henry shrugged, wiping his hands on an old rag. "It's not about deserving anything, Mrs. Peterson. It's about doing what's right. Besides, I've faced worse than him." She nodded thoughtfully, leaning on her cane as she looked around the cluttered garage. "Still, it's a shame folks like that can't see past their own noses. You're one of the best mechanics this town's ever seen, and they treated you like you were nothing." Henry chuckled softly, shaking his head. "People are quick to judge based on what they see, not what they know. That's always been the way of things. No use letting it bother me." Mrs. Peterson sighed, clearly frustrated on his behalf. "Well, I hope they appreciate what you did for them before the day is over." Henry smiled faintly but didn't respond. He knew better than to dwell on such things. Instead, he focused on tidying up his workspace, putting tools back in their proper places and sweeping the floor to clear away bits of grease and metal shavings. The routine of cleaning helped calm his mind, allowing him to push aside any lingering irritation from the encounter with Jake and Lily. As he worked, his thoughts drifted back to the car he'd just repaired. While replacing the faulty sensor had solved the immediate problem, Henry couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement about something else: the modifications he'd secretly made to the BMW while working on it. It wasn't something he did often, but every now and then, when someone particularly dismissive crossed his path, he liked to leave a little surprise behind. This time, the Harpers were in for something extraordinary. The idea had come to him midway through the repair process, sparked by Jake's endless insults and condescending remarks. At first, Henry had considered ignoring the urge entirely. He wasn't one to seek revenge or prove a point unnecessarily, but as the young man continued to mock him, Henry decided to indulge himself just a little. After all, why shouldn't Jake learn a lesson about underestimating people? Using spare parts and technology he'd developed over the years, Henry had discreetly upgraded the BMW's onboard computer system. The changes weren't visible at first glance. The car looked and sounded exactly the same as it had before, but beneath its sleek exterior lay enhancements that would leave even the most tech-savvy drivers amazed. From improved fuel efficiency to advanced navigation features, the modifications were subtle yet powerful, a testament to Henry's ingenuity and decades of experience. While Henry finished cleaning up, Mrs. Peterson stayed nearby, chatting idly about the town gossip. She mentioned how the new families moving into Pine Ridge seemed different from the older residents, more focused on appearances and less interested in community. Henry listened politely, nodding occasionally but keeping his attention on his work. He appreciated Mrs. Peterson's company, but his mind kept wandering back to the Harpers and the surprise waiting for them. Eventually, Mrs. Peterson noticed his distraction and smiled knowingly. "You've got something up your sleeve, don't you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Henry laughed softly, setting down his broom. "Let's just say I gave them a little something to think about." Mrs. Peterson grinned, clearly, delighted. Good for you. Maybe it'll teach that man some humility. I doubt it, Henry replied honestly. But it'll be fun to watch them figure it out. With the garage tidied up, Henry retreated to his workshop, a small room, tucked away at the back of the house. It was here that he kept his most prized possessions, blueprints, prototypes, and notes detailing inventions he'd dreamed up over the years. Unlike the practical repairs he performed daily, this space represented his true passion, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. For Henry, tinkering with machines wasn't just a job. It was a form of art, a way to express creativity and solve problems in ways no one else could. He sat down at a wooden table covered in papers and sketches, flipping through a notebook filled with ideas for futuristic technologies. Some were half-finished concepts, while others were fully fleshed-out designs. Among them was a plan for a revolutionary energy-efficient engine, one capable of running on alternative fuels without sacrificing performance. Another sketch detailed a self-driving system far more advanced than anything currently available on the market. These projects weren't just hobbies for Henry. They were dreams he hoped might someday change the world. For now, though, they remained, hidden away, known only to him. Henry had never sought fame or fortune from his inventions. He preferred to keep them private, sharing only glimpses of his work with trusted friends like Mrs. Peterson. There was freedom in anonymity, he often told himself, a chance to create without pressure or expectations. As he flipped through the pages, his eyes landed on a drawing of the very modifications he'd installed in the Harper's BMW. The design was elegant in its simplicity, yet packed with cutting-edge technology. Henry allowed himself a small smile, imagining the look on Jake's face when he discovered what the car could do. It wouldn't take long, he guessed. Someone like Jake would inevitably try showing off the vehicle's capabilities, and that's when the surprises would reveal themselves. Lost in thought, Henry barely noticed the sound of footsteps approaching until Mrs. Peterson called out from the doorway. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, leaning against the frame. "Come on inside before it gets cold." Henry glanced up, surprised to find the sun had nearly set. Time always slipped away when he was lost in his work. "Thanks, Mrs. Peterson," he replied, closing the notebook and standing up. "I'll be there in a minute." After washing his hands and changing out of his greasy work clothes, Henry joined Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen. She had prepared a simple meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, and the two of them ate together, chatting about everything and nothing. Despite her occasional teasing about his secretive nature, Mrs. Peterson understood Henry better than most. She respected his need for solitude and admired his quiet determination to keep learning and creating, even in his later years. As they finished eating, Henry leaned back in his chair, feeling content. The day had been eventful, but it ended on a peaceful note. He thought again about the Harpers and wondered how far they'd gotten before discovering the upgrades in their car. If nothing else, he hoped they'd gain a newfound appreciation for the value of humility, and perhaps a deeper respect for people like him. Later that evening, after Mrs. Peterson had gone home, Henry returned to his workshop. Sitting alone in the dim light of a desk lamp, he picked up a pen and began sketching a new idea, a concept inspired by the modifications he'd made earlier that day. His mind raced with possibilities, each one more exciting than the last. Though the world might never know about his inventions, Henry took pride in knowing he had the power to shape it, if only in small, unseen ways. Outside, the stars shone brightly in the night sky, casting a gentle glow over Pine Ridge. Henry gazed out the window, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Life hadn't always been easy, but he'd built something meaningful for himself, a legacy of hard work, creativity, and resilience. And as he turned back to his sketches, he reminded himself that the greatest achievements were often the ones no one else saw. The next morning, Henry woke up early as usual. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over Pine Ridge. He stretched and got out of bed, feeling refreshed after a good night's sleep. His mind was already buzzing with ideas, from the sketches he'd worked on late into the evening. Today promised to be another quiet day in his garage, but Henry knew better than to expect complete peace. Life always found a way to surprise him. After eating a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, he headed outside to check on his tools. The garage looked just as he'd left it the night before, clean and organized. Satisfied, he began sorting through some spare parts he'd collected over the years. Many of them were outdated or broken, but Henry had learned long ago that even the most useless-looking piece could have value if used creatively. He enjoyed finding new purposes for things others might throw away. It reminded him of how resourcefulness could turn limitations into opportunities. As he worked, his thoughts drifted back to the Harpers. He wondered how far they'd driven before realizing something unusual about their car. Jake's arrogance had been so thick that Henry doubted the man would notice anything until it slapped him in the face. Still, Lily seemed different, more observant, perhaps. If anyone caught on quickly, it would likely be her. Henry chuckled softly at the thought. It amused him to imagine Jake struggling to explain why his fancy BMW suddenly behaved like a spaceship. The modifications weren't flashy. They wouldn't announce themselves with loud alarms or flashing lights, but they were noticeable enough to raise questions. For instance, the car's engine now ran quieter and smoother than ever before, almost whisper-like. Its fuel efficiency had doubled, meaning fewer stops at gas stations. And the navigation system? Well, let's just say it could predict traffic patterns and suggest alternate routes faster than any human driver could process. These upgrades weren't random. They reflected Henry's philosophy of blending innovation with practicality. He believed technology should serve people, not overwhelm them. That's why he designed the changes to feel natural, as though they belonged there all along. Only someone paying close attention, or trying to brag about their car, would realize something extraordinary was happening. While Henry sorted through his tools, Mrs. Peterson appeared again, this time carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from her garden. "Thought you might like these," she said cheerfully, setting the basket on a nearby table. "They're perfect for stew." Henry smiled, grateful for her kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. You didn't have to do that." She waved off his gratitude. "Nonsense. Besides, I wanted an excuse to check in on you." "Did those folks come back yet?" He shook his head. "Not yet. But I'm sure they'll show up sooner or later. They'll want answers once they figure out what I did." Mrs. Peterson grinned mischievously. "I can't wait to see the look on that man's face." "Neither can I," Henry admitted, laughing quietly. "But honestly, I don't care much about him. If his wife learns something from this, that's enough for me." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "You've always been too kind-hearted for your own good, Henry Davis." They chatted for a while longer, discussing the weather and the latest news from town. Eventually, Mrs. Petroleum excused herself, leaving Henry alone with his thoughts. As the morning wore on, he decided to tinker with one of his older projects, a prototype for a solar-powered generator. It wasn't ready for public use, but it showed promise. Working on it helped distract him from wondering when, or if, the Harpers would return. Around midday, the sound of tires crunching against gravel broke the silence. Henry looked up from his workbench to see the silver BMW pulling into the driveway. Once more, this time only Lily stepped out of the car. She looked flustered but determined, her blonde curls bouncing as she approached the garage. "Mr. Davis?" she called out hesitantly. Henry wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to greet her. "Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you?" Lily glanced behind her as if checking to make sure Jake wasn't around. Then she lowered her voice. "Something strange is happening with our car. I think it might be related to the repair you did yesterday." Henry raised an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. "Strange how?" She hesitated, clearly unsure how to explain. "It's just different. Better, actually. The engine runs quieter. The mileage is incredible, and the navigation system, it's like it knows where we're going before we even decide. None of this was happening before." Henry nodded slowly. "Fane. Many repairs. IG innocence. Cars sometimes act differently after big repairs. Could just be coincidence. Lily frowned, unconvinced. No, it's more than that. My husband thinks someone tampered with it, that maybe you did something extra without telling us. Henry chuckled softly. If I tampered with it, ma'am, it wouldn't run this well. Lily relaxed slightly, though suspicion lingered in her eyes. Then what's going on? Because whatever it is, it's amazing. Henry leaned against the garage doorframe, crossing his arms casually. Let's just say I've been fixing cars for a long time. Sometimes I add little improvements that make them better than new. Nothing harmful, mind you, just enhancements. Her eyes widened in realization. So you did do something? He shrugged modestly. Call it a bonus. Consider it my way of proving a point. A point? She echoed, confused. That judging people based on appearances doesn't get you far, Henry explained gently. Your husband came here expecting the worst because of how I look and where I live. But I hope this teaches him, and maybe you, that greatness isn't always obvious. Lily stared at him, speechless. Finally, she nodded. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. I'll try to explain it to Jake, though I'm not sure he'll listen. Henry smiled kindly. That's up to him. All I can do is give him the chance to learn. With that, Lily returned to the car looking thoughtful. Before driving off, she gave Henry a small wave, which he returned warmly. As the BMW disappeared down the road, Henry felt a sense of satisfaction. Whether or not Jake appreciated the lesson, Lily clearly had. That was enough for him. Later that afternoon, Henry resumed working on his solar-powered generator. He lost himself in the task, enjoying the challenge of solving complex problems with simple solutions. The world outside faded away, leaving only the rhythmic hum of machinery and the steady beat of his own heartbeat. By evening, exhaustion settled over him, but it was a good kind, the kind that came from a day spent doing meaningful work. As he locked up the garage and headed inside, he paused to gaze at the stars twinkling above Pine Ridge. They reminded him of infinite possibilities, of dreams waiting to be realized. And though few people might ever understand the depth of his contributions, Henry took comfort in knowing that his legacy extended beyond what met the eye. The next day started much like any other in Pine Ridge. The air was crisp, and the morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across Henry's driveway. He woke up early, brewed himself a cup of strong coffee, and settled into his usual routine. After breakfast, he wandered out to the garage, ready to tackle whatever the day might bring. Though he didn't expect the Harpers to return anytime soon, he couldn't help but wonder how Jake would react once he discovered the full extent of the upgrades. As Henry organized his tools and reviewed some notes from the previous night, he reflected on his encounter with Lily. She had seemed genuinely grateful for his honesty, and her curiosity about the car's enhancements made him hopeful that she might share his perspective with Jake. Still, Henry knew better than to count on it. People like Jake often clung tightly to their pride, unwilling to admit when they were wrong. But that was okay. Henry wasn't doing this for validation. He simply wanted to remind them that assumptions could be dangerous. By mid-morning, the quiet rhythm of Henry's work was interrupted by the sound of an engine roaring down the road. It wasn't just any engine. It was loud, aggressive, and unmistakably familiar. Moments later, the silver BMW screeched to a halt outside the garage, kicking up clouds of dust. This time, both Jake and Lily climbed out of the car, though their expressions couldn't have been more different. While Lily looked thoughtful and slightly amused, Jake appeared furious, his face flushed red with anger. "What did you do to my car?" Jake demanded, storming toward Henry without so much as a greeting. Henry straightened up slowly, setting aside the wrench he'd been using. "Good morning to you, too," he said calmly, his tone measured despite Jake's hostility. "Don't. Give me that," Jake snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "Something's wrong with this thing, and I know it's your fault." Henry raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "Wrong? From what I hear, it's running better than ever." "That's exactly the problem," Jake exclaimed, throwing his hands in the air. It's not normal. How am I supposed to explain why my fuel gauge doesn't drop or why the GPS knows where I'm going before I even decide? Lily stepped forward, trying to intervene. Jake, calm down. Let's talk about this rationally. There's nothing rational about it, Jake shot back, ignoring her. This isn't some magic trick, it's my car and I want answers. Henry sighed quietly, leaning against the workbench. Son, there's no need to get worked up. Like I told your wife yesterday, sometimes repairs come with unexpected benefits. Nothing harmful, just improvements. Jake narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Improvements? What kind of improvements? Henry shrugged casually. Little things. Better mileage, smoother performance, smarter systems. You've got yourself a state-of-the-art vehicle now. Jake stared at him, incredulous. State-of-the-art? Are you serious? Do you even know what goes into making a car like this? I know enough, Henry replied evenly. And if you don't believe me, take it to another mechanic. They'll confirm everything checks out fine. For a moment, Jake looked torn between disbelief and frustration. Finally, he muttered, Fine, but if anything happens to it, you're paying for it. Henry nodded patiently. Fair enough. With that, Jake turned on his heel and stormed back to the car, slamming the door shut behind him. Lily lingered for a moment, offering Henry an apologetic smile. I'm sorry about him, she said softly. He's stubborn. It's all right, Henry assured her. Stubbornness fades with time, or so I hope. Lily chuckled faintly, glancing over her shoulder at Jake, who was busy fiddling with the dashboard controls. He'll figure it out eventually. Thanks again for everything. Henry smiled warmly. You're welcome. Drive safe now. As the BMW sped off down the driveway, leaving behind another cloud of dust, Henry shook his head and returned to his work. He didn't hold any ill will toward Jake. After all, everyone had moments of ignorance. What mattered was whether they chose to grow from those experiences. For now, Henry was content knowing he'd planted a seed of awareness in both of them. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Peterson stopped by again, carrying a plate of freshly baked cookies. How'd it go with the Harpers? She asked, setting the plate on the table. Henry chuckled, brushing grease off his hands. About as well as you'd expect. The husband's still mad, but the wife seems to understand. Mrs. Peterson grinned, picking up a cookie. Serves him right. Maybe next time he won't judge someone so quickly. Maybe, Henry agreed, taking a bite of a cookie. But people rarely change unless they're forced to. They chatted for a while longer, discussing the quirks of human nature and sharing stories about past encounters with difficult customers. Mrs. Peterson had known Henry for decades and understood his patience better than most. She admired how he handled adversity with grace, never letting others' negativity dim his spirit. After Mrs. Peterson left, Henry decided to spend the rest of the day working on one of his personal projects, a prototype for an energy-efficient heating system. It was something he'd been tinkering with for years, inspired by the cold winters in Pine Ridge. The design was simple yet innovative, using recycled materials to create warmth without wasting resources. As he sketched out new ideas and tested components, he lost track of time, completely absorbed in the process. By evening, the temperature had dropped significantly, and the sky turned a deep shade of purple. Henry wrapped up his work and headed inside, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Though the day had been eventful, it ended on a peaceful note. He warmed up leftovers for dinner and sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. Their twinkling lights reminded him of infinite possibilities, of dreams waiting to be realized. As he gazed at the night sky, Henry thought about the Harpers again. He wondered if Jake would ever truly appreciate the lesson he'd been given, or if he'd continue clinging to his pride. Either way, Henry knew he'd done his part. The modifications to the car weren't just about teaching a lesson, they were also a reminder of his own capabilities. Despite living in a modest town and working in a humble garage, Henry possessed skills and knowledge that rivaled the best in the industry. And while he might not seek recognition, he took pride in knowing that his contributions mattered, even if only to himself. Before heading to bed, Henry flipped through his notebook of inventions, pausing on a sketch of the solar-powered generator he'd been working on earlier. He added a few notes, refining the design based on insights he'd gained during the day. Each page represented countless hours of effort, creativity, and determination. Together, they formed a legacy of innovation that extended far beyond the confines of his garage. As he turned off the light and climbed into bed, Henry felt a deep sense of peace. Life in Pine Ridge might be quiet, but it was rich with meaning. Every car he repaired, every invention he dreamed up, and every person he encountered added depth to his story. And though the world might never fully understand the impact of his work, Henry knew that true greatness lay in the unseen, the small hidden acts of kindness, ingenuity, and resilience that shaped lives in ways no one else could see. The following days passed quietly in Pine Ridge. Henry returned to his usual routine, fixing cars for neighbors and tinkering with his inventions in the workshop. Though he occasionally thought about the Harpers, he didn't dwell on them. Life had a way of teaching its own lessons, and Henry trusted that time would reveal whether Jake had learned anything from their encounter. One crisp morning, as Henry was organizing tools in the garage, he heard the familiar crunch of gravel under tires. He looked up to see the silver BMW pulling into the driveway once more. This time, however, only Jake stepped out of the car. His expression was unreadable, neither angry nor friendly, just neutral. Henry straightened up, setting aside the wrench he'd been holding, and greeted him calmly. "Morning," Henry said, his tone steady. "What brings you back?" Jake hesitated for a moment, glancing around the garage before speaking. "I wanted to talk to you." Henry nodded, gesturing for him to continue. "All right, what's on your mind?" Jake took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what he was about to say. "Look, I've been thinking about what happened last week. The car, the upgrades, everything. And, well, I think I owe you an apology." Henry raised an eyebrow, surprised but not entirely shocked. "An apology? For what?" "For being rude," Jake admitted, his voice quieter now. "I judged you based on, well, stupid stuff. Your garage, your age, all of it. I didn't give you a chance to prove yourself, and I realize now how wrong that was." Henry studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his words. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Apologies are always welcome, son. But tell me, what made you change your mind?" Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's hard to explain. At first I thought someone had tampered with my car or installed some kind of virus. I called another mechanic, one of those fancy places in the city, and they couldn't find anything wrong. In fact, they said the car was running better than ever. Then Lily reminded me of what you told her, that sometimes people surprise you if you let them." Henry smiled faintly. "Your wife is a smart woman." "She is," Jake agreed, nodding. "Anyway, after hearing that, I started paying closer attention to the car. The mileage, the navigation system. It's all incredible. Better than anything I've seen before. And then it hit me. None of this could have happened without serious skill. Skill that I doubted you had because of how things looked on the surface." Henry leaned against the workbench, crossing his arms casually. "Appearances can be deceiving, Jake. Just because something or someone doesn't look impressive doesn't mean it isn't." "I get that now," Jake said earnestly. "And I'm sorry for treating you like you were less capable. You're obviously brilliant at what you do." Henry chuckled softly. "Don't sell yourself short, son. Everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Jake nodded, looking genuinely relieved. "Thanks for saying that, and thanks for not holding a grudge." "There's no need for grudges," Henry replied kindly. "We're all human. Now, is there anything else I can help you with?" Jake shook his head. "No, the car's fine. Actually, I came here to ask if you'd consider consulting for a project I'm working on. It's related to automotive tech, and after seeing what you did with my car, I think you'd be perfect for it." Henry raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Consulting, huh? That's quite a leap from fixing engines." "It's worth a shot," Jake insisted. "You've got ideas that could change the industry. Why keep them hidden away in a garage?" For a moment, Henry considered the offer. He'd spent decades creating and innovating in private, content to let his work speak for itself. But Jake's enthusiasm, and the opportunity to share his knowledge with a wider audience, piqued his interest. "I'll think about it," Henry said finally. "But no promises." "That's fair," Jake replied, smiling for the first time since they'd met. "Just thanks again for everything." With that, Jake climbed back into his car and drove off, leaving Henry alone in the garage. As the sound of the engine faded into the distance, Henry allowed himself a small smile. Whether or not he accepted Jake's offer, the encounter reminded him of the power of humility and growth. People weren't defined by their mistakes. They were shaped by how they responded to them. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Peterson stopped by, carrying a basket of fresh fruit. "I saw that young man leave," she said, setting the basket on the table. "Did he apologize?" "He did," Henry confirmed, chuckling softly. "And he even asked me to consult on a project." Mrs. Peterson grinned, clearly delighted. "Well, good for him. Looks like you softened his edges a bit." "Maybe," Henry mused. "Or maybe he just needed a reminder that greatness comes in all shapes and sizes." She nodded approvingly. "Either way, it's a win for everyone. So, are you going to take the job?" Henry shrugged, sipping a cup of coffee. "I haven't decided yet. Consulting isn't really my style, but it's nice to be recognized, I suppose." Mrs. Peterson patted his shoulder affectionately. "You deserve it, Henry. Don't forget that." After she left, Henry retreated to his workshop, where blueprints and sketches covered every available surface. He flipped through his notebooks, reviewing designs for solar-powered generators, energy-efficient heating systems, and futuristic engine modifications. Each invention represented years of effort and passion, yet most remained unseen by the world. For so long, Henry had believed that anonymity was enough, that his contributions didn't need recognition to matter. But Jake's visit planted a new thought in his mind. What if sharing his work could inspire others? What if his ideas could spark change beyond the borders of Pine Ridge? The possibilities excited him, though he wasn't ready to commit to anything just yet. For now, he was content to keep dreaming and creating, knowing that the future held endless opportunities. As evening fell, Henry stepped outside to watch the sunset. The sky blazed with hues of orange and pink, painting the horizon in vibrant colors. He leaned against the porch railing, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Despite the challenges life had thrown his way, he'd built something meaningful, a legacy of hard work, creativity, and resilience. In the distance, the stars began to appear, twinkling faintly against the darkening sky. They reminded Henry of infinite potential, of dreams waiting to be realized. And though few people might ever understand the depth of his achievements, he took comfort in knowing that true greatness lay in the unseen, the quiet acts of ingenuity and kindness that shaped lives in ways no one else could see. Henry gazed at the stars for a little longer, letting the peacefulness of the moment wash over him. Then, with a contented sigh, he turned and headed back inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but for now, he was exactly where he belonged in his modest home, surrounded by tools and ideas, living a life rich with purpose and meaning.